Enough is enough. How can a system that purports to protect the innocent be so brazenly complicit in corruption? For too long, we've watched as those in power twist the truth and trample on justice, leaving ordinary people betrayed and enraged. It's time to demand accountability and expose the rotten core at the heart of this broken institution. Let the fury of our collective indignation be the spark that ignites change. Do you believe it's time to rise up against systemic injustice? The courthouse in New Orleans buzzed with an undercurrent of tension that was as palpable as the humid summer air outside. Inside, under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights and the austere weight of tradition, every detail of the room echoed a quiet promise of justice. Yet beneath that veneer lay secrets and a story waiting to shatter the status quo. At the heart of this maelstrom sat Nia Thomas, a petite, resolute African-American woman in her early 30s, whose presence in the courtroom was a study in contrasts. Today, she was not the confident, meticulous intelligence operative she had spent years becoming. Today, she was a defendant, her hands restrained in cold, unyielding cuffs, and her eyes, steadfast, defiant, yet haunted, mirroring the uncertainty of the moment. The murmurs that rippled through the gallery as she was led into the chamber spoke of scandal and suspicion, yet few could fathom the depths of the truth concealed behind her calm exterior. It began as a routine drug bust, a narrative all too familiar to the people of New Orleans. The authorities had claimed that Nia was in possession of a large stash of narcotics, hidden away in a battered duffel bag found in her car trunk. To the untrained eye, the evidence was damning. The officers' reports, the physical evidence, and the eyewitness testimonies all formed a tightly knit tapestry of guilt. But for those with an inkling of the real story, every detail reeked of manipulation and a deliberate attempt to scapegoat an innocent woman. In the hushed prelude to the trial, the courtroom was a microcosm of New Orleans itself, a blend of opulent history and raw, gritty reality. The high-ceilinged chamber, adorned with dark wood paneling and historic portraits of bygone judges, now bore witness to a modern drama of power, betrayal, and redemption. As the gallery settled, the sound of hushed whispers and shuffling papers underscored the anticipation of what was to come. Judge Valerie James, known for her unflinching commitment to justice, took her seat with a demeanor that was both imposing and empathetic. Her eyes swept across the room, absorbing every nuance, from the tense expressions of the police officers to the hopeful glimmers in the eyes of Nia's supporters seated in the back. The courtroom was more than just a stage for legal proceedings. It was the arena where personal destinies and the collective conscience of a community would be put to the test. On one side, Detective Marcus Reed and Officer Derek Baker represented the law enforcement narrative. They were veterans of the force, men whose careers had been built on the assumption that the evidence as presented was infallible. Their voices, confident and measured, recited a story that had been meticulously crafted. Nia Thomas was portrayed as a cunning drug trafficker who had been seen interacting with known criminals, her every move documented by their surveillance. Their version of events was supported by reports, timelines, and a chain of custody that, on paper, left little room for doubt. Yet, behind the polished statements and rehearsed testimonies, something was amiss. The witnesses' recollections were laced with uncertainty, and the evidence, despite its apparent solidity, had subtle discrepancies that spoke of tampering and concealment. There was a whisper among some in the courtroom that the narrative had been engineered, a diversion to mask a darker truth. And that truth, for Nia, was something she carried in the depths of her guarded soul. Nia's calm throughout the proceedings was not born of indifference but of a lifetime spent balancing the weight of secrets and the burden of responsibility. Few knew that, beyond her public persona, Nia had dedicated nearly a decade of her life to serving as a covert operative for a secret intelligence agency. Under the cloak of anonymity, she had navigated treacherous terrains, from the back alleys of New Orleans to international hotspots in Europe and Africa, gathering critical intelligence and dismantling covert networks of criminal syndicates. Her work, shrouded in classified operations and whispered accolades, was a testament to her brilliance and resilience. Today, however, that very identity was what made her case so explosive. The authorities, determined to secure a swift conviction, had painted Nia as a mere drug mule, conveniently overlooking the intricate tapestry of her true life. To them, she was an easy target, a woman whose spotless record, unremarkable background, and seemingly ordinary existence made her the perfect scapegoat. Yet, as she sat there with unwavering resolve, every observer in the courtroom could sense that Nia was not the person they assumed she was. There was an aura about her, a mixture of quiet defiance and an almost palpable inner strength that defied the narrative constructed by those in power. The air in the courtroom crackled with the energy of imminent revelation. Every detail, from the polished mahogany benches to the subdued murmur of anxious anticipation, was a prelude to a confrontation that would soon expose a labyrinth of corruption and deceit. Behind the scenes, whispers of overreach and misconduct within the police department had begun to circulate. There were hints of manipulated evidence and altered testimonies, rumors that only added to the mounting tension as the trial loomed closer. As Nia was escorted to the defendant's table, the camera flashes of the local press captured every nuanced expression on her face. Some saw the glint of defiance in her eyes. Others perceived the shadow of a burden borne in silence. To her family and supporters, she was a beacon of hope, a symbol of the fight against a system that too often trampled the rights of the vulnerable. They believed in her, not just because of the evidence that the prosecution laid out, but because of the undeniable aura of righteousness that emanated from her every gesture. In that moment, the courtroom transformed into more than a mere battleground for legal proceedings. It became the crucible where ideals clashed with institutional might, where the truth fought to emerge from a morass of deception. Judge Valerie James, with her steady gaze and measured tone, reminded everyone present that the pursuit of justice was not merely a procedural formality. It was a sacred trust, a promise that the system, despite its flaws, could be redeemed by the courage of those who dared to challenge it. The narrative unfolding before the eyes of the spectators was not just a trial. It was an invitation to question the very foundations of authority and truth. As the prosecution began to outline their case, detailing the chain of events that had led to Nia's arrest, the room was filled with a blend of skepticism and hope. Every word, every piece of evidence, was scrutinized not only for its face value but for the hidden truths that lay beneath. The tension was nearly tangible, a shared, unspoken understanding among the observers that what they were witnessing was the beginning of something extraordinary. Nia's quiet presence in the midst of the chaos was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there exists a spark of resistance, a spark that, if nurtured, can ignite a revolution against injustice. The trial, with all its legal formalities and dramatic twists, was a microcosm of a broader struggle, a battle between a corrupt system and the indomitable spirit of a woman who refused to be broken. As the proceedings began in earnest, the echoes of every step, every whispered conversation, and every determined glance were etched into the memory of those present. The stage was set for a confrontation that promised to challenge the established order, to expose the rot at the heart of an institution that prided itself on upholding the law. In that charged atmosphere, the fate of Nia Thomas, and the very ideals of justice and integrity, hung in a delicate balance. The first day of the trial was not just a legal event. It was a narrative of hope, defiance, and the relentless pursuit of truth. It invited every onlooker to reflect on the meaning of justice in a world where appearances could be deceiving, where the line between right and wrong was often blurred by the machinations of power. And as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the time-worn floor of the courthouse, one thing was abundantly clear. The battle for truth had just begun. What would you do if you found yourself in Nia's shoes? The tension in the courthouse had barely subsided when the focus shifted from the static courtroom to the unfolding backstory of Nia Thomas, a narrative that would slowly unveil the complex web of events leading to her fateful arrest. Outside the formal proceedings, a clandestine world thrived, hidden behind the polished facade of New Orleans legal institutions. It was in this shadowy realm that the true nature of Nia's work and the intricacies of her capture began to take shape. In a series of flashbacks that interwove with the present trial, we were introduced to the clandestine life of Nia long before she ever set foot in that solemn courtroom. Born and raised in the vibrant yet unpredictable quarters of New Orleans' Marigny district, Nia had always possessed an insatiable curiosity about the world. From her early years, she exhibited an innate talent for blending into any environment, a skill that would eventually catch the eye of a covert intelligence agency. It wasn't merely her striking features or her poised demeanor that made her stand out. It was the fierce determination hidden behind those calm eyes and the quiet passion with which she navigated every challenge. After graduating with honors from a prestigious university, Nia's potential was quickly recognized by recruiters of a secret intelligence service. Her exceptional linguistic abilities, combined with an acute understanding of international affairs, made her an ideal candidate for undercover assignments. For nearly a decade, she had operated in the shadows, her true identity concealed beneath layers of aliases and carefully crafted covers. Whether infiltrating high-risk environments in Europe or gathering critical intelligence in volatile regions of Africa, Nia had become a silent guardian, a sentinel working for the greater good. Yet despite her storied career, Nia's covert assignments required a duality of existence that few could truly comprehend. By day, she maintained an unassuming persona, blending seamlessly into the fabric of ordinary society in New Orleans. She volunteered at local community centers, tutored at after-school programs, and even found solace in the simple pleasures of life that most overlooked. It was this juxtaposition, a life of ordinary public service masked by secret high-stakes operations, that rendered her both extraordinary and tragically vulnerable. The night that altered everything began like any other. Nia had been tasked with a seemingly straightforward surveillance operation. A dilapidated warehouse on the fringes of the French Quarter had been reported as a potential hub for illegal activities, and local informants had hinted at connections between street-level drug dealers and more sinister criminal networks. With her innate ability to remain unseen, Nia positioned herself at a discreet vantage point, meticulously observing the area. Her senses were honed to detect the slightest anomaly, a misplaced shadow, a whispered conversation that deviated from the norm. Unbeknownst to her, however, a parallel operation was unfolding. Detective Marcus Reed and Officer Derek Baker had been monitoring the same area for weeks. Under mounting pressure from their superiors to secure a high-profile arrest, they had orchestrated a plan designed to make an example out of an alleged drug trafficker. In their eyes, Nia's discreet observation was just another routine move in a well-worn script of criminal behavior. The authorities had been waiting for a convenient target, a person whose background was so pristine that any misstep could be chalked up to criminal ingenuity rather than meticulous planning. As the night deepened and the humid air of New Orleans pressed in from all sides, Nia's concentration was shattered by a sudden commotion. Flashing red and blue lights converged on the scene. In an instant, her careful observation was interrupted by the sound of approaching sirens and the hurried steps of uniformed officers. The delicate balance between her covert life and the ordinary world was shattered in a matter of moments. The officers, led by Detective Reed and Officer Baker, were swift and methodical. They surrounded the area with a precision that betrayed a rehearsed strategy rather than a spontaneous response to crime. Their plan was simple: create an undeniable chain of evidence linking Nia to an illicit drug exchange. In their minds, the moment was ripe for a dramatic arrest that would silence dissent and bolster their department's record in a city long plagued by drug-related issues. Cornered and caught off guard, Nia's pulse raced, yet her outward expression remained unervingly calm. The officers moved in, and within moments, she was handcuffed and her every move was documented by an array of cameras. The target of the arrest was clear: Nia, the unassuming woman whose ordinary life concealed an extraordinary secret. But as the police secured her and hauled her toward the waiting patrol car, subtle hints of the truth began to emerge. The evidence that the officers presented in their report was as contradictory as it was damning. They claimed to have discovered a duffel bag filled with high-purity cocaine in the trunk of Nia's car, a detail that would later become a cornerstone of their case. Yet those who had quietly observed the operation noticed peculiarities. The bag's presence was too conveniently placed, and the surrounding timeline too neatly aligned with the officers' predetermined narrative. Rumors had already begun to circulate among local residents and even within the ranks of the police, whispering of planted evidence and coerced testimonies. Back in the present courtroom, These flashbacks merged with the anxious anticipation of the trial. The prosecution's case rested heavily on these pieces of evidence and the supposedly ironclad statements of Detective Reed and Officer Baker. They had spent countless hours rehearsing their lines, convinced that the narrative was foolproof. Their version of events painted Nia as a dangerous criminal, a mastermind of drug trafficking who had manipulated her way through the underworld with calculated precision. However, as the defense began to peel back the layers of that narrative, the discrepancies in the evidence started to cast long, dark shadows. Nia's lawyer, Julian Carter, a sharp and resolute advocate known for his fearless approach to the truth, had been poring over surveillance footage, phone logs, and witness statements. Julian was not convinced by the neatly packaged story provided by the police. He noted that the timestamps on the dashcam footage conflicted with the officers' testimonies. Furthermore, eyewitness accounts from local residents contradicted the official narrative, describing a scene of confusion and hurried retreat rather than a well-planned ambush. Julian's investigation had led him down a labyrinthine path of hidden agendas and deliberate misdirections. He discovered that some of the evidence had been tampered with, a detail that was quietly corroborated by a forensic expert called to examine the chain of custody of the narcotics. The notion that an undercover intelligence operative could be so easily ensnared by a rigged setup was almost too absurd to be believed. Yet the mounting inconsistencies provided a glimmer of hope for Nia's defense. In the quiet corridors of the courthouse, as the trial commenced its second day, the story of that fateful night was scrutinized from every angle. The stark contrast between Nia's calm during her arrest and the frantic, overzealous behavior of the officers was laid bare. It became increasingly apparent that the orchestrated nature of the operation was designed to fit a narrative rather than reveal the truth. The police department, under pressure to deliver results in a city battling rampant crime, had chosen to ignore the possibility that they had framed an innocent woman, an error that would soon cost them dearly. Throughout this unfolding drama, Nia's inner world remained a mystery to those around her. While the courtroom buzzed with theories and speculations, only she truly understood the weight of her secret life. Every whispered conversation, every doubtful glance from a juror, and every glimmer of sympathy from a local reporter reminded her of the precarious balance she maintained. The duality of her existence, of being both a covert operative and a dedicated community servant, was the very foundation upon which her entire life rested. Now, as the evidence began to unravel before the eyes of the jury, the stakes of the trial soared. Julian Carter's meticulous cross-examinations of the police officers painted a picture of a night that was less about apprehending a drug trafficker and more about executing a premeditated plan to silence an inconvenient truth. The narrative of a simple drug bust was no longer sufficient to mask the deeper currents of corruption and misdirection at play. Meanwhile, whispers of dissent began to echo among the courthouse staff and even among some within the police force. A few officers, disillusioned by the rigid adherence to an unethical protocol, started to question the orders they had followed. Rumors circulated about a shadowy figure, someone with influence in high places, who had orchestrated the operation with a precision that bordered on the sinister. This unseen hand, believed by some to be tied to criminal networks with deep-rooted connections in the city's underbelly, had ensured that Nia Thomas became the fall guy for a case that was far more complicated than it appeared on the surface. Every revelation added another layer to the narrative. As Nia sat in the defendant's chair, her eyes reflecting both sorrow and fierce determination, she knew that her journey toward vindication would be fraught with obstacles. Yet, in her heart, there was an unwavering resolve to expose the truth, regardless of the cost. It was a battle that transcended her own fate, a battle against a system that had, time and again, used its power to trample over the rights of the innocent. In this charged atmosphere, the courthouse had transformed into a crucible of justice and retribution. The trial was no longer just about whether Nia was guilty or innocent. It was about challenging the very foundations of authority, the integrity of evidence, and the ethical boundaries of law enforcement. The threads of a carefully woven conspiracy were beginning to unravel, and with each passing moment, the promise of redemption and accountability grew stronger. As the second day of the trial drew to a close, the courthouse was left in a state of suspended animation. The evidence, now seen in a new light, promised to redefine the case. The jurors, absorbing the weight of every word and every contradictory piece of evidence, were beginning to see beyond the surface of the police's narrative. In that moment, a spark of hope ignited, a belief that justice might yet prevail in a system that had long been tainted by corruption. If you were in Nia's shoes, would you trust the system or fight to reveal the hidden truth? The courtroom's atmosphere shifted as the trial reached an unforeseen crescendo. Every element of the day, the hushed tones of the gallery, the scrutinizing gaze of the jury, and the steadfast determination on Nia Thomas's face, signified that the case was evolving into something far more significant than a mere drug bust. With mounting evidence hinting at a deliberate setup and a growing chorus of dissent against the established narrative, the trial had clearly passed a critical juncture. As the proceedings resumed on the morning of the third day, the air was thick with anticipation. Judge Valerie James, her expression an intricate blend of stern resolve and cautious empathy, called the courtroom to order. This time, her voice carried an unmistakable gravity, echoing against the high ceilings and ornate woodwork, reminding everyone that they were witnessing not just a legal battle, but a turning point in a deeply flawed system. Julian Carter, Nia's determined defense attorney, began his opening statement for the day with an intensity that resonated throughout the room. "Ladies and gentlemen of the jury," he declared, "we stand here not to debate a simple case of narcotics, but to question the very fabric of our justice system, a system that, at times, may sacrifice truth for expedience." His words were deliberate, calculated to unsettle the comfortable assumptions that had long been taken for granted. Evidence, as we shall see, has been tampered with, testimonies have been coerced, and a narrative has been forcefully imposed upon an innocent woman. Today, we will uncover the discrepancies that betray this charade. The defense's evidence was not limited to damning inconsistencies. It was also woven with the personal struggles and sacrifices that had marked Nia's clandestine journey. Flashbacks intermingled with live testimony as Nia recounted snippets of her past. Not just the covert missions and the quiet moments of community service, but also the cost of leading a double life. Her voice, steady yet tinged with sorrow, recounted the long nights spent balancing duty with the desire for normalcy. Every operation, every mission, was undertaken with the belief that I was serving a greater good, she said, her eyes reflecting both resolve and regret. But tonight, I stand accused not for crimes committed, but for a truth inconvenient to those in power. Across the courtroom, Detective Marcus Reed and Officer Derek Baker maintained their rigid posture, but there was an undercurrent of unease in their eyes. Their earlier confidence had started to waver in the face of mounting evidence that Julian Carter methodically laid out. A forensic expert, Dr. Elena Morales, took the stand to present her findings. With calm precision, she explained how the chain of custody for the seized narcotics had been compromised. The forensic analysis reveals that the duffel bag's placement, as well as the timing of the evidence collection, does not align with standard procedure, she stated. There are anomalies that suggest the possibility of tampering. Her testimony, underpinned by meticulous data and expert scrutiny, cast a long shadow over the prosecution's previously unassailable narrative. The tension in the room was palpable as Julian continued his cross-examination of the police officers. He pressed Detective Reed about the discrepancies between the dashcam footage and his sworn testimony. "Detective Reed, isn't it true that your footage indicates you were still in transit at a time when you claimed to have witnessed the exchange near Nia's car?" he asked, his tone edged with both determination and a hint of incredulity. The detective's eyes darted nervously, and for a moment, the confident facade crumbled under the weight of undeniable evidence. His attempts at recovery were half-hearted, and the cracks in his testimony widened with each probing question. Then came the moment that sent shockwaves through the courtroom. A surprise witness, Officer Lena Harris, who had previously been a silent observer within the ranks, was called to testify. Lena, known for her integrity and quiet dedication, had grown increasingly disillusioned with the rampant corruption she had witnessed within the department. With trembling hands but unwavering conviction, she took the stand. "I couldn't remain silent any longer," she confessed. "I've seen evidence being manipulated, and I've heard conversations that make it clear we were meant to frame an innocent person. Her voice, though soft, resonated with truth and a desperate need for accountability. Lena's testimony not only corroborated the inconsistencies raised by the defense, but also provided an insider's perspective that threatened to unravel the entire case. As Lena recounted details of a covert meeting where high-ranking officials discussed the necessity of a scapegoat to divert attention from deeper systemic issues, the courtroom was engulfed by murmurs of disbelief. Her revelation that certain log entries had been deliberately altered to obscure the true sequence of events added a critical layer of complexity to the case. I have documented evidence, phone records, altered timestamps, that point directly to a coordinated effort to mislead this court, Lena asserted, her eyes scanning the room as if daring anyone to challenge her words. In that moment, the scales of justice began to tip. The prosecution's tightly knit narrative was being disassembled piece by piece. Even the prosecuting attorney, Margaret Reeves, found herself grappling with the emerging contradictions. During a particularly intense exchange, she conceded, "The evidence presented today compels us to reconsider our position. The discrepancies are too significant to ignore." Her words, laced with reluctant acknowledgement, signaled that the facade of the case was crumbling under the weight of truth. Throughout the day, the courtroom became a theater of revelations. Julian Carter's careful dissection of timelines, combined with the poignant recollections of Nia's personal sacrifices, painted a picture of a woman caught in a tragic web of deceit. The defense's narrative was no longer confined to technicalities. It had become a passionate plea for justice in the face of overwhelming corruption. Each witness, each piece of newly introduced evidence, further eroded the credibility of the officers who had once seemed untouchable. As the final sessions of the day unfolded, the jury was left to grapple with a tumult of emotions and revelations. The once clear-cut image of a dangerous criminal mastermind had been replaced by a portrait of a woman of extraordinary courage, ensnared by the machinations of a broken system. Nia's testimony, delivered with a raw honesty that resonated deeply with all who listened, was the linchpin of this transformation. "I never intended to be a criminal," she declared, her voice resolute yet laden with the pain of countless silent battles. "I was serving a duty greater than myself, a duty that demanded sacrifices, both seen and unseen. Today, I stand not only for myself but for every person who has been wronged by a system that prefers expedience over truth." In that charged moment, as the courtroom fell into a reflective silence, it became clear that the case was evolving into a powerful reckoning. The battle was no longer just about whether Nia was guilty of a fabricated crime. It was about whether the pillars of justice could be restored in the face of corruption, manipulation, and abuse of power. The courtroom was transformed into a battleground for truth, where every spoken word and every piece of evidence carried the potential to reshape lives and redefine the very notion of justice. The turning point had arrived, and as the day drew to a close, the sense of anticipation among the observers was unmistakable. The evidence and testimony presented had not only dismantled the prosecution's case, but had also ignited a broader conversation about accountability and integrity within law enforcement. The seeds of doubt that had been sown now blossomed into a formidable challenge against a system long believed to be impervious. As the gavel finally came down for the day, Judge Valerie James reminded everyone in the courtroom that the pursuit of truth was an ongoing process, one that required unwavering courage, persistence, and a commitment to justice that transcended personal risk. "Today's revelations compel us to reflect deeply on our responsibilities," she intoned. "Justice is not a static ideal. It is a dynamic pursuit that demands our constant vigilance." With those words hanging in the charged air, the courtroom emptied, leaving behind a trail of whispered conversations and contemplative silence. Outside, under the fading light of the day, a palpable sense of hope mingled with uncertainty. The community, the jurors, and even those within the police force were now forced to confront a truth that challenged long-held assumptions. How would you react if the truth you believed was nothing more than a carefully constructed illusion? The atmosphere in the courtroom grew even more electric as the trial entered a phase where every revelation seemed to unearth deeper layers of corruption and betrayal. With the defense having firmly dismantled the prosecution's narrative, the stage was now set for a dramatic reckoning that would challenge not only the fate of Nia Thomas, but also the very foundations of the system that had tried to silence her. Early that morning, as the first rays of sunlight pierced through the tall, stained glass windows of the courthouse, an air of solemn determination replaced the usual quiet tension. Jurors shuffled into the courtroom, their faces reflecting both curiosity and the weight of responsibility. The once familiar corridors now resonated with a newfound energy, a mix of apprehension and anticipation for what the day would bring. Judge Valerie James re-entered the courtroom with a measured calm that belied the storm of evidence and testimony that lay in wait. Today was to be a day of revelations, a day when the final pieces of the puzzle would fall into place. The judge's opening words, though brief, carried an unmistakable gravity. Today, we confront not only the facts of this case, but the integrity of our very institutions. Julian Carter, Nia's resolute defense attorney, rose to address the court once more. His eyes swept across the room, meeting those of the jurors, the press, and even the uneasy expressions on the faces of the police officers. "Ladies and gentlemen," he began, his tone firm yet impassioned. "We have heard testimony that exposes not just a flawed investigation, but a deliberate attempt to manipulate the course of justice. Today, we will bring forth the final evidence that will show you the truth behind the facade." At that moment, the courtroom door opened, and in walked a man whose presence commanded attention. His name was Detective Alan Monroe, a former member of the department whose conscience had proven too heavy a burden to carry in silence. Detective Monroe had been instrumental in gathering critical documents and internal reports that no one else dared to produce. His decision to come forward was as much a moral reckoning as it was a legal one. With a deep breath, he took the stand, his eyes reflecting a mixture of regret and resolve. "Your Honor," Monroe began, his voice low but clear, "I was once part of the system that now stands accused of corruption. I have seen the inner workings of this department and the ways in which orders can be twisted to serve hidden agendas." His testimony was like a key turning in a lock, opening the door to truths that had been kept in the shadows for far too long. "I have in my possession internal memos, emails, and incident reports that directly implicate Detective Reed, Officer Baker, and others in a scheme to plant evidence and fabricate a narrative that would serve their personal interests." As Detective Monroe methodically laid out his evidence, a series of printouts, annotated memos, and covertly recorded conversations, the courtroom fell into a stunned silence. Each document was a blow against the edifice of authority that had been presented as infallible until now. The internal memos revealed discussions about making the arrest stick and ensuring that our record looked impeccable, phrases that echoed ominously in the context of Nia's case. Monroe's evidence also highlighted discrepancies in the official logs and underscored a pattern of behavior that could no longer be ignored. The prosecution, led by Margaret Reeves, tried to salvage their case. But even she could not hide her faltering confidence as the documents were displayed for all to see. Reeves attempted to argue that the evidence was circumstantial and that the officers' actions were justified under the pressures they faced. Yet, the raw honesty in Detective Monroe's voice and the indisputable nature of the internal communications left little room for doubt. The scales of justice, it seemed, were tipping irrevocably in favor of truth. The testimony did not end there. Monroe detailed how the orders had come from higher up, a shadowy figure within the department who had remained unnamed but whose influence was unmistakable. This unnamed authority had orchestrated the setup, ensuring that Nia Thomas would be framed and that the entire operation would appear as nothing more than routine law enforcement. "I regret that I was once a part of it," Monroe confessed, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "But today, I choose to stand with the truth, and with Nia." In a heart-stopping moment, Detective Monroe presented a sealed envelope, its contents destined to be the final, irrefutable proof of the corruption at the heart of the case. When the envelope was opened by a court-appointed official, the documents inside corroborated every claim the defense had made. The revelation was so profound that murmurs of disbelief and outrage spread like wildfire through the courtroom. Even the jurors, who had been carefully weighing every piece of evidence, could not help but be moved by the sheer magnitude of the betrayal. As the revelations continued, Nia Thomas herself was called back to the stand. Her demeanor was composed, her voice steady, as she addressed the court once again. "I have always believed in the power of truth," she said softly, yet with an intensity that filled the room. "I have dedicated my life to protecting others from harm, often at great personal cost. Today, I stand not as a criminal, but as a citizen who has been wronged by those who were supposed to uphold the law." Her words resonated with a deep-seated sense of moral righteousness, challenging everyone present to consider the human cost of a system riddled with abuse of power. In her eyes shone the sorrow of years spent in the shadows, the burden of secrets kept for the greater good, and the determination to reclaim her life and dignity. Every syllable she uttered was a testament to her unwavering commitment to justice, a commitment that had not wavered, even in the face of overwhelming adversity. The courtroom became a battleground of emotions. The weight of the evidence, combined with the personal testimonies of those brave enough to break their silence, sparked a palpable shift in the room's energy. Even the press, who had once been there merely to capture sensational headlines, now recorded every word with a sense of historic significance. Social media buzzed with live updates, and citizens outside the courthouse could be heard debating the unfolding drama with a fervor that transcended partisan lines. Margaret Reeves, now stripped of the confidence she once wielded so effortlessly, attempted to reconcile the damning evidence with her remaining arguments. However, the tide had turned beyond recovery. Reeves' voice, which earlier had been so assured, now faltered under the weight of the irrefutable documents and the testimonies that laid bare a system steeped in deceit. "The evidence before this court compels us to take a hard look at our practices," Reeves conceded, her tone subdued. "We must ensure that the integrity of our justice system is restored, regardless of the personal or professional costs." Outside the courtroom, the impact of these revelations rippled through the community. Citizens, already on edge from years of systemic neglect and corruption, felt a surge of empowerment. In neighborhoods across New Orleans, discussions erupted in coffee shops, community centers, and local forums about the need for reform and accountability. The case of Nia Thomas was no longer just a legal proceeding. It had become a clarion call for change, a moment where the collective voice of the people demanded that those in power be held accountable for their actions. As the day drew to a close and the final testimonies were recorded, the energy in the courtroom was one of cautious hope. The judge, recognizing the seismic shift that had occurred, declared a brief recess to allow the jurors to deliberate in light of the newfound evidence. During the break, hushed conversations and determined glances filled the corridors. Even the officers, once so sure of their own invulnerability, appeared diminished, haunted by the knowledge that their carefully constructed narrative had unraveled before their eyes. In that charged interlude, Nia Thomas found a moment of quiet reflection. Surrounded by the supportive faces of her legal team and the encouraging whispers of those who believed in her innocence, she allowed herself a brief respite, a silent promise that she would not be broken by this ordeal. Her journey had been one of sacrifices and hidden battles, and now, with the truth emerging from the depths of deceit, she stood on the brink of reclaiming not just her freedom, but the very honor of a system that had nearly betrayed her. Judge Valerie James reconvened the session with a somber declaration. "The evidence presented today leaves no doubt regarding the integrity of the process," she said, her voice resonating with both authority and compassion. "We are compelled to address the misconduct that has been laid bare in this courtroom. Let this moment serve as a reminder that justice is not merely the result of following procedure. It is the triumph of truth over corruption." With those powerful words, the courtroom entered a state of reflective silence. The reverberations of the day's events would be felt far beyond the walls of that historic building, as the community and the legal system at large grappled with the implications of what had transpired. Would you stand for the truth even when it means challenging an entire system? In the wake of the courtroom revelations, the atmosphere within the historic New Orleans courthouse transformed from one of turbulent upheaval to a solemn period of reckoning and reflection. The day had been long and arduous, a journey through the darkest corridors of corruption and deceit that culminated in the undeniable triumph of truth. As the final sessions of the trial unfolded, the weight of every word, every piece of evidence, and every tear shed in silent defiance began to manifest a profound change, not only for those present but for the entire community. Judge Valerie James, having witnessed the unfolding drama with an unyielding commitment to justice, delivered her final instructions with measured calm and unwavering authority. Today, we have seen the strength of the human spirit and the power of truth, she intoned. We are reminded that the pursuit of justice is a relentless, sometimes painful process, yet it is one that must always be honored above all else. Her words resonated deeply, casting a long shadow of introspection over everyone in the courtroom. For Nia Thomas, the culmination of years spent leading a double life in the shadows of clandestine operations and community service now had a purpose beyond personal vindication. Her testimony, raw, heartfelt, and imbued with the burden of countless sacrifices, had not only dismantled the narrative constructed by corrupt law enforcement, but had also served as a beacon for those who believed in a higher standard of justice. With a soft, almost imperceptible smile of relief etched across her face, she stepped down from the witness stand, her eyes glistening with both the sorrow of past hardships and the hopeful anticipation of a future reclaimed. Outside the courtroom, the city of New Orleans was abuzz with the news of the trial's explosive revelations. Community centers, cafes, and living rooms became impromptu forums for debate and discussion. Neighbors, many of whom had long harbored suspicions about the integrity of their local institutions, now found their doubts vindicated. The case of Nia Thomas transcended the confines of legal proceedings. It had become a clarion call for accountability, urging citizens to demand a system where the powerful are not above reproach and where truth is not sacrificed at the altar of expediency. Within the police department, the fallout was immediate and seismic. Detective Marcus Reed and Officer Derek Baker, once pillars of the department's credibility, now faced the stark reality of their actions. The internal investigation launched in the wake of Detective Alan Monroe's courageous testimony exposed not only their roles in the fabrication of evidence, but also the complicity of others who had enabled such misconduct. As disciplinary actions began to unfold, many within the force found themselves grappling with the painful realization that loyalty to a flawed system had blinded them to its failings. Conversations in the dimly lit break rooms turned from defensive murmurs to confessions of regret, as some officers quietly vowed to restore honor to their badge by championing reforms from within. Margaret Reeves, the once unshakable prosecuting attorney, was forced to confront the consequences of her unwavering faith in a narrative built on manipulated facts. In a rare moment of introspection, she issued a public statement acknowledging the systemic failures that had allowed corruption to fester. We must never lose sight of the fundamental truth that justice cannot be compromised by those sworn to uphold it, Reeves declared, her voice both somber and resolute. Her words, though measured, rippled through legal circles and sparked widespread calls for comprehensive reviews of departmental procedures and ethical standards. As the final verdict was delivered, a unanimous decision that exonerated Nia Thomas of all fabricated charges, the courthouse erupted in a muted celebration of justice restored. The gavel's resounding strike on the bench echoed like a benediction, marking the end of a chapter defined by betrayal and the beginning of a new era steeped in accountability. Families who had supported Nia throughout the ordeal embraced her with tearful relief, while her legal team exchanged exhausted yet triumphant smiles. In that moment, Nia's personal journey of hardship and resilience transformed into a collective victory for all those who had suffered under the weight of institutional corruption. Yet, redemption was not limited solely to the exoneration of an innocent woman. It resonated far beyond the courtroom walls. For Nia, it meant reclaiming her identity, a multifaceted self that had once been forced into the shadows by necessity. With her name cleared, she faced a future where her secret life as a covert intelligence operative would always remain a double-edged sword. While her courageous stand had exposed the rot within a system meant to protect, it also placed her at a crossroads where personal sacrifice met national security concerns. Even so, Nia resolved that her duty to the truth and to the community that had embraced her outweighed the risks. "I have been given a second chance," she whispered in a quiet moment after the proceedings, her voice barely audible above the distant hum of celebration. "I will use it to build a future where justice isn't just an ideal, but a reality for every citizen." In the days that followed the trial, sweeping reforms began to take root. The local government, spurred by the public outcry, initiated a series of measures designed to overhaul police practices and enhance transparency in law enforcement. New oversight committees were established, and independent audits of department procedures became routine. Community leaders collaborated with reform advocates, launching initiatives aimed at rebuilding trust between the police and the people they served. The echoes of Nia Thomas's trial resonated in every policy meeting and public forum, serving as a constant reminder that accountability was not merely a lofty ideal, but a tangible necessity. For Detective Alan Monroe, his decision to break the silence marked a turning point in his own personal journey, a journey marred by guilt and the heavy burden of complicity. His testimony, while exposing the misdeeds of his former colleagues, also ignited within him a renewed sense of purpose. Determined to use his newfound clarity to effect meaningful change, he became an outspoken advocate for reform within law enforcement. In interviews and public appearances, he recounted his experiences with a tone of measured contrition, urging his peers to reflect on their own actions and to strive for a higher standard of integrity. "I was a part of a system that lost its way," he admitted, his eyes reflecting both regret and resolve. "But today, I choose to walk a different path, a path where every officer, every citizen, can stand united in the pursuit of true justice." As the city of New Orleans began its slow journey toward healing, the story of Nia Thomas, and the monumental trial that had reshaped the narrative of justice, became etched into the collective memory of the community. Her tale was recounted in local newspapers, discussed on community radio, and even became the subject of art and literature that celebrated the resilience of the human spirit. Her legacy, born from the crucible of betrayal and hardened by the fires of adversity, evolved into a symbol of hope and a call to arms against any form of injustice. In quiet moments, when the chaos of the trial had subsided and the courthouse stood empty but for the echoes of its storied past, one could almost hear the soft murmurs of promise. They spoke of a future where truth would no longer be suppressed, where those in power would be held accountable, and where every individual had the right to a fair and transparent process. It was a future that had been forged in the hearts of those who had dared to speak out, to challenge the status quo, and to demand that justice prevail above all else. In the final analysis, the trial of Nia Thomas was more than a legal proceeding. It was a transformative moment in the struggle for human dignity. It reminded everyone that the path to redemption is often paved with hardship, but that the courage to stand up for what is right can spark a change that reverberates across generations. As the sun set over New Orleans, casting long shadows over the city's storied streets, a quiet confidence took root, a belief that even in a world marred by corruption, the light of truth would always find a way to shine through. Would you dare to stand alone in the pursuit of truth, even when the odds seem insurmountable? In the days and weeks that followed the trial, New Orleans seemed to exhale a collective sigh of relief, a breath drawn after years of suppressed anger and simmering distrust. The echoes of the courtroom revelations had begun to resonate far beyond the confines of the historic courthouse. The city, with its vibrant tapestry of music, art, and resilient spirit, was now poised on the brink of transformation. For many residents, the trial of Nia Thomas had become a watershed moment. In small neighborhood gatherings and spirited community meetings, citizens discussed the implications of the case. No longer was justice an abstract ideal confined to legal texts. It had taken on a tangible form in the courageous stand of one woman and the damning evidence that exposed deep-rooted corruption. Conversations around dinner tables, in local cafes, and even on the bustling streets of the French Quarter revolved around one common theme: accountability. The voices of those who had once felt voiceless now surged with determination, demanding reforms and changes that could ensure a more transparent and just system for all. Within the police department, the aftermath of the trial was both painful and transformative. The scandal had rocked the institution to its core. For Detective Marcus Reed and Officer Derek Baker, The once unassailable pride in their careers had given way to introspection and regret. The internal investigations, spurred on by the testimony of brave whistleblower Detective Alan Monroe and Officer Lena Harris, uncovered layers of systemic issues that had been long ignored. New oversight committees were quickly established, and senior officials who had turned a blind eye to misconduct were held accountable. It was a period marked by both turbulence and hope, a reckoning that promised to reshape the culture of the department from within. Margaret Reeves, the prosecuting attorney whose confidence had faltered under the weight of incontrovertible evidence, worked tirelessly to restore public trust in the legal system. In a series of community forums and press conferences, she acknowledged the failings of the past and outlined a plan for comprehensive reforms. "We must ensure that every case is handled with the utmost integrity," she declared in one such address. "Today, we have learned that even those we trust to uphold the law are not immune to error. But we have also seen that when the truth emerges, justice can prevail." Her candid admission and commitment to change sparked a dialogue among legal professionals across the state, inspiring other jurisdictions to review their own practices. For Nia Thomas, the verdict was not just a personal vindication. It was the beginning of a new chapter in a life defined by duality. Once burdened by the weight of a secret identity and a manipulated narrative, she now embraced her future with cautious optimism. Though her career as a covert operative had been irrevocably altered by the exposure of her true identity, Nia discovered that her story had given her an unexpected kind of freedom. With her name cleared, she could finally step out from the shadows and rebuild her life on her own terms. Friends, colleagues, and community members rallied around her, offering support and encouragement. In quiet moments away from the public eye, Nia allowed herself to reflect on the journey that had led her to this moment. A journey filled with sacrifice, hardship, and, ultimately, the triumph of truth. Her transformation resonated deeply with the people of New Orleans. In community centers, where she had long volunteered to support children's literacy and empowerment programs, Nia became more than just a symbol of resilience. She became a beacon of hope. Parents and teachers spoke of her with reverence, citing her unwavering dedication to justice as an inspiration for future generations. Nia's courage reminds us that even when the world seems unjust, one voice can spark a revolution. One local community leader remarked during a neighborhood meeting. Amid this environment of renewal, the city's cultural landscape began to reflect the changes taking root. Local artists, musicians, and writers found inspiration in Nia's story and the broader movement for reform. Murals depicting symbolic representations of truth overcoming darkness sprang up on brick walls in the Marigny district and beyond. Jazz musicians, known for their soulful expression and ability to capture the spirit of New Orleans, composed new tunes that spoke of redemption, loss, and hope. The arts became a medium through which the community processed the pain of the past and celebrated the promise of a better future. Yet, the road to genuine transformation was not without its challenges. The reforms initiated in the wake of the trial met resistance from those who had benefited from the old ways of operating. Some within the police department, still clinging to remnants of a corrupt past, attempted to undermine the new oversight measures. Political maneuvering, bureaucratic inertia, and lingering skepticism among a portion of the public meant that progress would be gradual, marked by both victories and setbacks. However, the collective resolve of the citizens, fueled by the trial's dramatic revelations, ensured that momentum was on the side of change. In the legal realm, Nia's case was studied extensively in law schools and reform workshops across the nation. It became a case study on the importance of transparency, accountability, and the need for constant vigilance against abuses of power. Scholars and practitioners alike debated the lessons learned from the case, highlighting the pivotal role of courageous individuals, both inside and outside the system, in safeguarding justice. Seminars and conferences were held, focusing on how to prevent such miscarriages of justice in the future. The legacy of the trial was not simply in the exoneration of an innocent woman, but in its enduring impact on the principles of fairness and integrity in legal proceedings. For Detective Alan Monroe and Officer Lena Harris, the aftermath of the trial offered a chance for redemption and a new beginning. Monroe, whose decision to testify had cost him dearly, dedicated himself to mentoring young officers, emphasizing the importance of ethical conduct and personal accountability. His journey from complicity to contrition served as a powerful reminder that it is never too late to change one's path. Lena, once silenced by fear, emerged as a vocal advocate for internal reform and the protection of whistleblowers within law enforcement. Their combined efforts not only helped heal the wounds of the past, but also paved the way for a more transparent and just future. As New Orleans gradually moved forward, the transformation was felt in every corner of the city. From the bustling markets of the French Quarter to the quiet residential streets of the Garden District, the trial of Nia Thomas had ignited a spark that would eventually grow into a sustained movement for justice and reform. The air was filled with a renewed sense of possibility, as if the very spirit of the city had been reinvigorated by the collective determination to never again allow corruption to thrive unchecked. In the end, the legacy of Nia Thomas's trial was multifaceted. It was a personal triumph over adversity, a public reckoning with institutional failings, and a catalyst for lasting change in a community that had long yearned for accountability. The journey was far from over, but the seeds of reform had been sown, promising a future where justice was not a privilege for the few but a right for all. If you had the chance to rebuild a broken system, what changes would you prioritize to ensure fairness and integrity for everyone? As the transformative momentum of the trial continued to ripple through New Orleans, the city found itself on the cusp of a renewed identity, a community determined to rewrite its narrative of injustice into one of accountability and hope. In the months following the verdict, what began as a singular battle for truth evolved into a collective movement that touched every facet of civic life. In the public arena, grassroots organizations emerged with renewed vigor. Activists, community leaders, and reform-minded citizens united under the banner of justice for all, dedicated to ensuring that the abuses of the past would never be repeated. They organized town halls, workshops, and public forums that brought together residents from all walks of life to discuss systemic reform, the importance of transparent governance, and the role of community oversight in a healthy democracy. Local government officials, inspired by the widespread public outcry, initiated sweeping policy reforms. A new independent oversight committee was established with representatives from various sectors of society, civic organizations, legal experts, and everyday citizens, all committed to monitoring law enforcement practices. This committee was charged with reviewing departmental procedures, investigating misconduct without bias, and implementing recommendations designed to restore public trust. The transparency and accountability measures introduced were hailed as a turning point, a tangible promise that the power of the people had indeed reshaped the system. For many, the story of Nia Thomas transcended her personal ordeal. She became a living symbol of resilience, a beacon of hope that illuminated the path to reform. Embracing her newfound role, Nia began working with community centers and youth outreach programs, sharing her story to inspire others to stand up for their rights. In classrooms, community halls, and local media, her experiences were recounted not as tales of victimization, but as powerful lessons in courage, sacrifice, and the relentless pursuit of justice. Nia's transformation, however, was not without its challenges. The exposure of her covert identity as an intelligence operative had left a mark, a reminder that the world she once navigated in secret was forever altered. With heightened security concerns and the inevitable scrutiny of her past, Nia chose to channel her energy into public service. She partnered with local nonprofits to create mentorship programs, aimed especially at young people from marginalized communities, ensuring they had the resources and support to forge their own paths in a society striving for equality. Her efforts resonated deeply, fostering a renewed sense of empowerment among those who had long felt disenfranchised. In the corridors of the reformed police department, a cultural revolution was underway. The echoes of the trial spurred a gradual yet significant shift in mindset among officers. Many who had once operated under a cloak of unquestioned authority began to embrace a new ethos, one that prioritized integrity, respect for citizens, and a commitment to ethical policing. Training programs were overhauled, with an emphasis on community relations, conflict resolution, and the importance of safeguarding civil liberties. Veteran officers who had faced disciplinary actions used their experiences as a catalyst for change, mentoring younger recruits on the importance of transparency and accountability. The legacy of the trial was further solidified in the realm of education and public discourse. Universities and law schools across the region began incorporating Nia Thomas's case into their curricula as a landmark example of how a single act of defiance against systemic corruption could catalyze widespread change. Seminars and symposiums were convened where scholars debated the implications of the trial for criminal justice reform, ethics in law enforcement, and the balance between national security and individual rights. The academic community's engagement with the case helped foster a deeper understanding of the complex interplay between power, policy, and personal accountability. Art and culture, too, played their part in cementing the new legacy. Murals depicting symbolic scenes of truth triumphing over darkness appeared on walls throughout New Orleans, each stroke a tribute to the bravery of those who dared to challenge the status quo. Poets, musicians, and filmmakers drew inspiration from the trial, producing works that celebrated the indomitable human spirit and the transformative power of justice. In these creative expressions, the narrative of Nia Thomas and the movement she had ignited was immortalized, ensuring that future generations would remember the day when a single voice changed the course of history. In the end, the long shadow of corruption that had once darkened the streets of New Orleans began to recede, replaced by a vibrant mosaic of hope, reform, and renewed trust. The journey was far from over. Reforms required constant vigilance, and the scars of the past would always serve as a reminder of the fragility of justice. But for the first time in many years, the city felt a palpable sense of renewal, as if every citizen had become a guardian of a promise to build a fairer, more just society. As Nia Thomas walked through the rejuvenated neighborhoods, greeted by smiling faces and expressions of gratitude, she understood that her battle had not only been for her own freedom, it had been for the very soul of her community. With every step, she carried the hope of countless others who believed that, in a world fraught with challenges, the courage to speak the truth could indeed ignite a new dawn. What legacy would you leave behind if you had the power to reshape a broken system? In the face of adversity, let us remember that our strength lies in our compassion and our unwavering commitment to justice. Even when the darkness seems overwhelming, love and unity can light the path to a brighter tomorrow. We stand together, with hearts full of hope and gratitude for every step we take toward building a fairer, kinder world. Thank you for being part of this journey. Your voice matters and your support inspires change. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel and join our community as we continue to make a difference together.